It was one of those mild, honey-colored afternoons when the sun falls softly across the curtains and even the clock seems to tick slower. The smell of cinnamon lingered in the air from the apple pie I'd baked that morning, and somewhere outside, the wind chime on the porch rang like an old memory. I'd settled myself into the armchair by the window, the one my late husband used to call my thinking chair, and let my eyelids rest. I wasn't truly asleep, just hovering in that quiet place between waking and dreaming, where thoughts drift like dust in sunlight. The house had grown busier. These last few years since David and Melissa moved in, at first it had felt like a blessing. The laughter of youth back in the hallways, footsteps on the stairs, another coffee cup clinking beside mine in the mornings. After my husband passed, the silence had nearly swallowed me whole. So when David suggested they move in for a while, I said yes with a grateful heart. A mother never stops wanting her child near. I could hear them now, faintly, their voices threading down the hallway from the kitchen. They thought I was napping, and perhaps that's why their tones carried an ease they rarely used around me. David's voice was low, steady, thoughtful. Melissa's was sharper sweet on the surface, but edged with something I couldn't name at first. It was ordinary talk, groceries, the leaky tap, plans for the weekend. I half smiled, thinking how nice it was that they managed the house so well. Then Melissa's voice lowered. The kind of whisper people use when they believe walls are loyal and ears grow dull with age. Did you call the agent yet? I almost didn't register it. Agent for what? My hearing isn't perfect, but curiosity has a way of sharpening the senses. Not yet, David murmured. I told you we should wait. Wait for what? Melissa said quickly, her tone a mix of impatience and caution. She's not getting any younger. David, we can't live like tenants forever. I felt my breath catch, not in panic. Just a small, startled pause. I told myself I'd misheard, that they were talking about something else entirely. A travel agent? Maybe. They'd mentioned a trip once, but then she said my name. Your mother barely leaves this place. Half these rooms are wasted space. Once we sell, we could finally get a proper house, something modern. Sell. The word thudded through me like a heartbeat, too loud for its own body. I stayed perfectly still, eyes closed, listening. I could hear David sigh. Melissa, please, not this again. This again, she shot back. We've been married 5 years, David. 5. You said moving in here was temporary. Now it's permanent, and we're the ones keeping the place running. She doesn't even notice half of what goes on. I wanted to rise, to walk in there, to remind her that she had a name, and that my legs still worked fine. But some instinct, the same one that stops you from touching a hot stove, even before it burns, kept me still, because something told me this conversation wasn't finished, and I needed to hear all of it. David's voice softened, almost pleading. Melissa, it's her home. You can't just— Oh, come on, she interrupted. You know, she'll leave it to you anyway. What difference does it make if we sell it now or later? Think about it, the market's perfect. We could clear the mortgage, maybe even start that business you wanted. A silence followed, thick and heavy, the kind of silence that has its own sound, breathing, shifting, waiting. Then David said quietly, she's not just anyone, she's my mother. The way he said it, defensive, tired, hurt more than the words themselves. Once upon a time he'd have said it with pride. Melissa's reply was soft, but sharp enough to cut through the air. And I'm your wife. I could almost see the way she must have looked at him, then chin slightly raised. That polished confidence I'd always admired until I saw the edge beneath it. I'm not saying we throw her out, she continued, lowering her voice again. I'm saying we make arrangements. There are wonderful retirement places near the coast. She'd be comfortable. She'd have people her age. We'd visit. It's not cruel, David, it's practical. Practical. Such a tidy word for betrayal. I felt a chill despite the warm sun on my lap. My own son, my gentle, grateful boy, sat there while his wife discussed where to send me like I was a piece of furniture that no longer matched the decor. I listened harder, heart thudding. David's voice again, small, uncertain. I just don't want to hurt her. She won't even notice once it's all arranged, Melissa said. We'll tell her it's for her health, that the stairs are dangerous, that she deserves rest. She'll believe you. I pressed my hand against my chest, not from shock, but from something slower, heavier, a sadness that began to take shape like fog settling over water. They moved on to details, then numbers, time, phrases like, talk to the lawyer, and once the offer's in. Every word scraped against something inside me I didn't know could still bleed. And yet, I kept listening, because I needed to know just how deep the roots of this plan went. As their voices faded into murmurs, my mind traveled back through years of memories. David as a boy, standing on a stool beside me, stirring cake batter. David's first apartment, when he called every Sunday just to hear my voice. The day he brought Melissa home for dinner, how shy he'd been, how proud. I'd thought she was wonderful, then bright, charming, a spark in his serious world. Maybe I'd been too eager to see her that way. Maybe loneliness had blurred my judgment. I shifted slightly in my chair, and the old floorboard creaked. For a moment, I thought they'd stop talking. My pulse quickened, but their conversation continued, softer now, like they'd moved farther away. I caught fragments. Listing next month. She won't resist. We'll make it sound kind. When the voices finally faded completely, replaced by the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant call of a lawnmower outside, I opened my eyes. The sunlight had shifted. The room looked the same, yet nothing was the same anymore. I stared at the lace curtains, at the dust motes swirling lazily, and felt the first quiet crack in something I'd always believed was unbreakable: family. But I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was curious. How long had this been happening? How many smiles at breakfast were hiding calculations behind them? How many kind gestures had been rehearsed? I looked toward the hallway where their voices had been, and a calm, almost eerie thought settled over me. If she hadn't said my name next, I might have pretended I misheard. I sat there for a long time after their voices faded, my hands folded loosely in my lap, the clock marking every second that passed like a heartbeat outside of my own. I could almost hear my husband's voice inside my head, steady and kind, the way he used to sound when life frightened me. Ellie, people don't turn cruel all at once. They simply start choosing comfort over conscience. Perhaps that's what I had just witnessed Crawford winning, eventually. I stood, the stiffness of age reminding me how long I'd been sitting still. My knees complained, my back ached, but my mind was sharp and bright, lit by questions that refused to settle. I moved quietly through the hallway, the scent of lemon cleaner and Melissa's perfume mingling in the air. On the side table by the stairs lay a stack of mail I hadn't noticed earlier. At the very top, half tucked under a catalog, was an envelope addressed to David Turner, from a local real estate agency. I stared at it for a long second before sliding it gently back under the pile. Proof could wait. I needed calm first. In the kitchen, I could hear Melissa humming, cheerful now, as if she hadn't just discussed uprooting my life. She was chopping something, her rhythm brisk, efficient. I poured myself a glass of water, each movement deliberate, rehearsed, ordinary. She turned when she heard me. "Oh, you're awake. Did we wake you?" I smiled, the kind of smile women learn after decades of marriage and motherhood. "No, dear," I said softly, just resting my eyes. She looked almost relieved. "Good. I was just making dinner." David ran to the store for milk. "Lovely," I said, and left the room before my voice could tremble. Back in my chair, I stared out of the window, pretending to watch the garden while my thoughts twisted quietly. Anger wanted to come, but grief held it back. Betrayal from strangers is one thing. Betrayal from your own child has a different shape. It isn't a knife. It's a slow unraveling of everything that once felt safe. I tried to imagine what had led here. Had I done too much for them, made it too easy? I'd insisted they saved their money, told them not to worry about rent. I'd thought I was giving them security. Perhaps what I'd really given them was entitlement disguised as comfort. When David came home later, he called out cheerfully, "Mom, we got your favorite tea." His voice was the same voice that used to shout from the backyard, asking for one more game of catch. I answered with warmth. I didn't feel, "Thank you, love." The kettle hissed. Plates clinked. Domestic sounds filled the house again, smoothing over the afternoon's cruelty, like a rug thrown over a cracked floor. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Through the wall, I could hear their muffled voices, then laughter, then silence. Every sound reminded me that the conspiracy wasn't outside my home. It was under my roof, breathing the same air. Yet even as tears pooled in the corners of my eyes, a strange clarity settled over me. I could not undo what I had heard, but I could decide what it would make of me. The next morning the house smelled of toast and coffee. I moved quietly, listening. They spoke in ordinary tones again: work schedules, errands, bills, so normal it almost convinced me yesterday had been imagination. Almost. Then, as David left for work, Melissa said, "Don't forget to call about the listing." My hand tightened on the edge of the counter. He paused. "Not today," he muttered. "We'll talk later." When the door shut behind him, she sighed, long and frustrated. She hadn't seen me standing in the doorway. "Everything all right, dear?" I asked gently. She jumped a little, then smiled too brightly. "Oh, yes, fine, just thinking out loud." I nodded, poured myself coffee, and sat down opposite her. "You and David have plans for the weekend?" Her spoon clinked against the cup. "Maybe a drive into town." "Why, just curious," I said, letting the word hang between us. She looked at me, studying, perhaps wondering if I'd overheard. I offered nothing in my expression but mild grandmotherly warmth. After a moment, she relaxed, checked her phone, and left the room. Only then did I allow my smile to fade. Later that afternoon, while tidying the dining table, I found another small piece of the puzzle. A brochure for a retirement residence. Glossy pages, promising companionship, comfort, and carefree living. My name was written in small pencil letters on the corner, Eleanor Turner. My stomach fluttered, not with fear, but with disbelief at their boldness. I slipped it between the pages of my recipe book, where it would stay until I decided what to do. Outside, the light began to change, shadows stretching across the garden. I watched them lengthen and thought about how shadows always tell the truth. They show what's real even when light tries to soften it. That was me now, all shadow, no illusion. At dinner, I listened while they chatted about mundane things. Melissa laughed too easily. David avoided my eyes. Every gesture told a story their words tried to hide, and yet, beneath my calm surface, something resolute was taking root. They might think age had dulled me, but they'd mistaken gentleness for weakness. I was my husband's wife, after all, and he'd taught me that patience is the sharpest blade. When I went to bed that night, I opened the drawer of my bedside table and took out my old notebook, the one where I used to jot grocery lists and recipes. I turned to a blank page and wrote the date. Beneath it, in small, steady letters, I wrote, "Heard them today. Melissa plans to sell the house. David quiet, said she moved me somewhere comfortable." I closed the notebook and placed it back in the drawer. Not for revenge, just for truth, because truth, once written down, can't be twisted into kindness later. In the days that followed, I listened more carefully. I noticed how Melissa lingered near the phone, how she lowered her voice when speaking, how David's shoulders tensed when I entered a room. I learned the rhythm of their deceit, and with each small confirmation, my sadness folded itself into something steadier. Resolve. Still, there were moments when the ache would surface unexpectedly. When I passed the photograph of David as a boy holding his first school medal, when I watered the roses his father planted, when I caught my reflection and saw the same gentle eyes that had once believed family was forever, those moments hurt, but they also reminded me why I had to stay calm. One late afternoon, as I folded laundry in the spare room, I heard them again downstairs, voices low but urgent. I moved quietly to the top of the stairs. Melissa was saying, "The agent wants to know if we can schedule a viewing next week." David's answer was muffled, "She's not ready. Let me handle it." Melissa's laugh was small and sharp. "You can't even tell her we're planning this. She'll find out eventually." "She won't," he said. "Not if we do it right." Do it right. That phrase stayed with me long after they stopped talking. I stood there in the half-light, my folded towel clutched to my chest, and felt the quiet click of decision settle inside me. If they were making plans, then so was I. I would keep listening. I would keep smiling. I would give them every reason to believe I was the harmless old woman they'd decided I'd become. And when the time came, I would make sure their arrangements surprised them far more than they could ever surprise me. Downstairs, Melissa's laughter drifted up again, light, confident, certain. She thought I couldn't hear her, but I heard every word, and I would remember them all. The days after that conversation felt like walking through a dream. I couldn't wake from a world that looked exactly the same, yet nothing inside it felt familiar anymore. The morning sun still spilled across the kitchen counter. The kettle still whistled its same old tune. Melissa still hummed as she watered the plants. But under it all, I heard it. The echo of that single word that had cracked everything open. Sell. Every sound in the house seemed louder now. The scrape of a chair, the click of a cupboard, the distant murmur of their voices through walls that once carried laughter. I caught myself listening constantly, half hoping to prove myself wrong, half afraid I'd hear something worse. And I did. It was Wednesday afternoon when the illusion truly shattered. Melissa was on the phone in the kitchen. She spoke softly, but her tone carried that practiced brightness people use when they're being polite to strangers. "Yes," she said. "The property's still occupied, but we'll arrange access soon. It's in good condition, though it needs updating." Occupied. The word hung in the air like smoke. I stood in the hallway, a basket of folded towels in my arms, my breath caught in my throat. She was talking about my house, not our family home, not even my mother-in-law's place. Just profita. When she hung up, I slipped into the sitting room before she could see me. My knees felt weak, so I sat down in my husband's old chair, the one that still carried the faint scent of pipe tobacco and leather. I let the towels rest on my lap and stared at the framed photograph on the mantelpiece. David at his graduation. His arms slung round me, his face alight with pride. "Couldn't have done it without you, Mum," he'd said that day. I'd believed him. I'd believed every word my son ever spoke to me now. I wasn't sure I knew the sound of his honesty anymore. When he came home that evening, I watched him closely. The small things told the story his mouth wouldn't, the way he avoided my gaze when he spoke, the quick check of his phone before answering a simple question, the faint guilt that flickered across his face when Melissa called him from another room. I wanted to ask him, "David, what happened to us?" But I didn't. Not yet. I needed to understand first. That night, as I washed the dishes, my mind wandered back to the years when the house was full of joy, when every corner carried a memory. Every scuff on the wall had a story. I remembered David's laughter echoing up the staircase, the smell of Christmas dinners, the nights we stayed up late talking about his future. I'd raised him in this house, through scraped knees and teenage heartbreaks, through lean years, when his father and I counted every penny but never let him know. When his father fell ill, this house became our sanctuary, and after the funeral, it became my anchor. The garden was his pride, the kitchen my comfort, the bedroom our shared history. I'd thought bringing David and Melissa home would breathe life back into it. Instead, they were suffocating it with their plans and their spreadsheets and their whispered talks about moving forward. I couldn't help remembering something my husband once said, years ago, when a neighbor's children had fought over inheritance. "Ellie," he'd told me, "never let money come between love and family. It doesn't leave either standing." He'd been right, and here I was, living proof. Over the next few days, the little betrayals kept showing themselves in small, cruel ways. I overheard Melissa on another call. "Yes, my husband's name is on the papers." "What papers?" And one morning, when I went to dust the living room shelves, I found a set of property valuation forms tucked behind a stack of magazines. My address printed neatly at the top, signed by David Turner. My hands trembled so hard, I had to sit down. So it was real. They'd already taken the first steps. I pressed the papers flat against my lap, reading each line slowly, carefully. Market value, potential buyers, transfer options. Each phrase was another blade, cutting through trust. I traced David's signature with my finger and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not grief, but resolve. That evening, when we all sat together for dinner, I watched them both closely. Melissa was all smiles, asking if I wanted more potatoes. David nodded along, answering questions about his work, careful not to meet my eyes for too long. The scene would have looked perfect to anyone else, a loving family sharing a quiet meal. But beneath the surface, I could see it, the fear of exposure, the guilt swimming just behind their words. I said nothing. I ate my dinner, listened to Melissa's stories, even laughed once or twice, but my mind was elsewhere, already building quiet plans. When I went to bed that night, I didn't cry. I sat on the edge of the mattress, the house silent around me, and looked at the moonlight spilling across the floorboards. Maybe this is what growing old truly means, I thought, learning how to lose things you thought were yours forever. But even as the thought formed, another followed, steadier, stronger. Or maybe it's learning when to stop letting people take them from you. The next morning, I woke early. The air smelled like rain and possibility. I made myself tea, the same way I always did. But there was something different in me now, a stillness that felt like strength. As I stood by the kitchen window, watching the garden sway under the soft drizzle, I caught my reflection in the glass. Silver hair, lined face, eyes that had seen joy and sorrow in equal measure. I smiled faintly. "You've lived through worse, Ellie," I whispered. "You'll live through this." I heard footsteps behind me, Melissa's voice, bright and rehearsed. "Morning, you're up early." "Yes," I said calmly. "Couldn't sleep." She poured herself coffee and began talking about errands, about how David might need to meet a consultant later. She didn't notice that my eyes were fixed on the raindrops running down the window pane, each one a tiny promise to myself. Let them whisper, let them plan. I had heard enough to know what they were capable of, and now they would learn what I was capable of, too. because families, like houses, can crumble quietly, or they can be rebuilt with stronger walls, and I was done watching mine fall apart in silence that afternoon. I took out my notebook again, turned to a fresh page, and wrote, "They're moving forward with selling. He's signed something, but so have I, a decision to protect what's left of this family, even if it means saving it from them." I closed the notebook, placed it gently back in the drawer, and smiled to myself. They still thought I couldn't hear, but I was listening closer than ever. The morning after I decided to act, the house seemed to greet me differently. It wasn't just my home anymore. It was a stage where I had to play my part carefully. Every smile rehearsed, every silence measured. I had lived here for nearly 40 years, and for the first time, I felt like a stranger in my own story, but that was about to change. The kettle hissed softly as I poured myself a cup of tea. In the reflection of the kitchen window, I could see Melissa in the garden, on the phone again. Her voice carried faintly through the glass, sharp and quick. "Yes, she's still here. No, she doesn't suspect it. Of course, David's handling it." I sipped my tea slowly, pretending to look at the flowers. She thought I couldn't hear her, perhaps because I moved slower now, or because I sometimes asked her to repeat things. But age is a clever disguise. People forget how much you can notice when they stop paying attention to you. After she went inside, I walked out to the garden, letting the cold air steady me. On the patio table lay an open folder weighed down by a coaster. I glanced around, no one in sight. The wind flipped one of the pages. My heart pounded as I read the heading, "Property Appraisal, Turner Residence." I didn't need to read more. I closed the folder, placed the coaster back on top, and turned toward the roses. I pruned a few stems, my hand shaking only slightly. It wasn't fear, it was awakening. That afternoon, I began my quiet watch. I started noting small details, the times Melissa made her calls, the names she mentioned, the way David's voice softened when he lied. I didn't need confrontation yet, I needed truth, and truth, like a seed, grows best in silence. I began keeping my notebook with me at all times. Inside its worn cover, I wrote simple lines, times, dates, words that might seem meaningless to anyone else. Tuesday, 3:47 p.m., call with Stacy. Mentioned deposit. Wednesday, David left early, said he was meeting Tom, returned with new pen from realty office. Friday, Melissa asked about retirement options, smiled when she thought I wasn't looking. Each note was a thread, and together they began weaving the outline of something undeniable. But the hardest part wasn't hearing their lies, it was acting as though I didn't. Pretending ignorance requires a kind of discipline I didn't know I possessed. I smiled through dinners, complimented Melissa's cooking, laughed at David's stories, all while my heart carried the weight of their betrayal. One evening, as Melissa cleared the dishes, I watched David scrolling through his phone, his thumb hesitating on a message before locking the screen. "Everything all right, love?" I asked. He looked up quickly. "Yeah, Mum, just work stuff. Work stuff. Always work stuff." Later, after they went upstairs, I sat in the quiet living room. The old clock ticked steadily, each second reminding me I still had time to protect what mattered, time to make choices on my terms. I glanced around at the photos on the mantel. David at 5 years old, holding a toy airplane. David and his father fishing at the lake. David and Melissa on their wedding day, her smile dazzling, his eyes full of pride. I touched the frame lightly. "You were raised better than this," I whispered. The next morning, I made tea for all of us. Melissa came down first, bright as always. "Morning, Ellie. You're up early again." "Couldn't sleep," I said. "Dreams keep me busy these days." She laughed politely and sat with her tablet, scrolling through something. From where I stood, I could see the edge of a document, the logo of a housing agency. I turned to rinse the teapot so she wouldn't notice me noticing. After breakfast, she left for errands. David stayed behind to work from home. Around noon, he took a call in his office, door slightly ajar. His voice was low but tense. "No, she doesn't know anything." "Yes, we'll finalize soon. I'll get the signatures." Signatures. The word wrapped around my heart like ice. When the call ended, I moved quietly down the hallway and peeked in. He was staring at the floor, shoulders slumped. For a moment, he looked like the boy I once knew, overwhelmed, lost, and against my will, a surge of pity rose in me. I wanted to walk in and hold him like I used to when the world felt too big. But then he picked up his phone and sent a quick message, smiling faintly at whatever came back, and the pity drained away. That night, I wrote another note in my book. He's gone too far to be uncertain now. Over the next week, I noticed new behaviors, subtle, telling. Melissa began locking her phone when she left the room. David started taking walks in the evenings, always at the same time, always alone. I followed him once, far enough to stay unseen. He turned down Maple Street and entered the small cafe near the post office. Through the window, I saw him meet a man in a gray suit. Papers changed hands. They shook on something. That the betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore. It was official. I walked home under the cold evening sky, the wind tugging at my coat. My mind wasn't spinning anymore. It was clear. Painful clarity, but clarity nonetheless. They thought they were planning quietly around me, but every secret they whispered had already become mine. That night, when I went to bed, I didn't reach for my notebook. Instead, I reached for the framed photo on my bedside table, my husband smiling in his fishing hat. "You'd be proud," I murmured. "I'm keeping my head. You always said never to rush a storm. Let it form properly before you face it." I smiled at that memory, because this storm was forming exactly as it needed to. The next morning, I decided to begin the next step. Not confrontation yet, but preparation. I made a phone call of my own. The number I dialed hadn't been used in years. I wasn't sure if it would still work, when a warm, familiar voice answered. Relief flooded through me. "Eleanor Turner," he said, surprised but kind. "It's been a long time." "Mr. Whitman," I replied softly. "You handled our papers when my husband passed." "I did. How are you, Mrs. Turner?" I hesitated, then said the only truth that mattered, still learning who to trust. He paused long enough to understand. "Would you like to come in?" "Tomorrow," I said, quietly. When I hung up, the house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Melissa had gone out shopping. David was upstairs on his laptop. I sat at the table, staring at the phone, and realized that for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel helpless. Fear had turned into focus. The next morning, I told Melissa I had an appointment with my doctor. She smiled, sympathetic but distracted, and offered to drive me. "No, dear," I said sweetly. "It's just a checkup. I'll take the bus." I left the house with my handbag and a calm expression, but inside I was trembling with the weight of what I was about to do. The bus ride downtown was short, filled with the murmur of strangers. I watched them and wondered how many were carrying secrets behind polite smiles. Mr. Whitman's office looked exactly the same, shelves of old law books, the faint smell of paper and polish. He poured me tea himself, the way he always had when my husband was alive. "Now," he said gently, "tell me what brings you." And I did. Not everything, just enough. I spoke of signatures I hadn't given, conversations overheard, a feeling that something was being moved from beneath my feet. He listened without interrupting, his eyes kind but sharp. When I finished, he nodded. "You've always been prudent, Mrs. Turner. I can help secure the property so no transfer occurs without your explicit consent. Quietly, it will look like routine paperwork. Discreetly, please," I said. "They mustn't know." He smiled. "Discretion is half my trade." When I left his office, the sun was breaking through the clouds, and for the first time since that dreadful afternoon, the light felt like it belonged to me again. I walked a little slower on the way home, letting the wind clear my thoughts. Back at the house, Melissa was in the living room arranging flowers. "Everything go well?" she asked. "Perfectly," I said. "The doctor says I'm strong for my age." She laughed, half amused, half dismissive. "Of course you are." Later, when she wasn't looking, I opened the drawer where she kept her stationery. There, beneath a stack of recipe cards, I found another brochure, a different real estate agency, new contact numbers scribbled in the margins. I took a photo of it with my phone and put everything back exactly as it was. That evening, David mentioned over dinner that he'd be working late the next few nights. Melissa smiled too quickly, like someone who already knew. I just nodded, asking nothing. But every word they spoke was now a puzzle piece, falling neatly into place. For the next week, I continued my quiet watching. I learned their patterns. When David checked his emails, when Melissa whispered in the hallway, when the sound of their laughter carried a false note, I learned where they hid their documents, which drawer creaked, which floorboard betrayed a step. The house, once my comfort, had become my instrument, and as I moved through it, I realized how much I still loved it. The worn banister smooth under my hand, the scent of lavender from the linen cupboard, the sunlight that still found the same corner every morning. It wasn't just walls and wood, it was my history, and I was done letting anyone sell it like a forgotten heirloom. One evening, while they were out for dinner, I went into David's office. The desk was neat, but one folder sat slightly askew. I opened it carefully. Inside were printed emails between him and the agent, proposed dates, estimated sale price, commission terms. I took photos of every page, then placed them back exactly as I'd found them. My heart was racing, but not from fear, from certainty. When they returned later, laughing at some story from the restaurant, I was sitting by the fire, knitting, the perfect picture of a harmless old woman. "Did you two have a good time?" I asked. "The best," Melissa said, hanging up her coat. I smiled. "Good. You both deserve a little happiness." The irony tasted bittersweet on my tongue, but it steadied me. That night, when I wrote in my notebook, the entries looked different, less like notes, more like evidence. June 12th, met with lawyer. Protective clause filed. June 14th, copies of emails secured. June 16th, confirmed signatures can't proceed without my consent. I closed the book, feeling the faint hum of power returning to my bones. They thought I was silent because I was weak, but silence, when used wisely, is a language of its own. The following weekend brought a small test. Melissa burst into my room unannounced, flustered. "Ellie, have you seen a folder from David's office? He can't find something important." I looked up from my knitting.com as still water. "A folder? No, dear. Should I help you look?" She studied my face for a moment, perhaps searching for guilt, but found only wrinkles and patience. "No, that's all right," she muttered and left. When the door closed, I smiled quietly. They were beginning to feel what I wanted them to feel, uncertainty. That evening, I baked an apple pie, the way I used to when David was small. The smell filled the house, wrapping it in memory. When I brought them each a slice, Melissa looked touched. "You're spoiling us," she said. "Maybe I am," I replied. "You never know how long these comforts last." She laughed, not catching the meaning, and I savored that small victory. Days turned into weeks. On the surface, life returned to its easy rhythm, but beneath it, tension coiled tighter. I could see it in David's eyes, guilt wearing him thin, and in Melissa's restless energy, her constant need to check, confirm, control. They were planning, but so was I, and my plan required patience. One quiet evening, after they'd gone to bed, I stood in the hallway and listened to the sound of their muffled conversation. "What if she finds out?" David whispered. "She won't," Melissa said firmly. "You worry too much." I smiled faintly in the dark. Worry was the least of his problems now, because the next step of my own plan was already in motion. Mr. Whitman had arranged the legal protections, and soon I'd visit another office, one that dealt not in property but in charity. There were people who could use a home filled with kindness, not calculation. I walked back to my room, my slippers silent against the floorboards. On my bedside table, the moonlight caught the edge of my notebook. I opened it to a fresh page and wrote, "They think I'm their problem to solve, but I've already solved mine." I closed the book, turned off the lamp, and lay down with a calm heart. The quiet spy had done her work well. It was a Saturday morning like any other, the kind that begins with sunlight spilling gently across the curtains and ends with the smell of something warm in the oven. Melissa had been unusually cheerful since breakfast, humming as she wiped down the counters, moving briskly from one task to another, as if preparing for guests. She'd even asked David to mow the lawn, which he did without complaint, though I noticed the quiet way he avoided my eyes when I asked, expecting company. "Oh, just a friend," Melissa had said lightly, the words floating past me as if they meant nothing. But after weeks of listening, of learning the hidden languages of tone and silence, I heard the small tremor beneath her voice, the careful weight of someone balancing truth on the edge of a lie. I said nothing. I smiled. I folded laundry. I baked a pie. But inside, the air around me thickened with knowing. By noon, the house gleamed. The smell of lemon polish lingered in every room, and Melissa had arranged flowers on the dining table. Fresh tulips, my favorite. Though she couldn't have known that, she did everything perfectly. As though she wanted the house to look like a dream. I sat in my armchair, the one by the window, pretending to read while my mind moved in quiet circles. Something was coming. I could feel it in the stillness that always falls before a storm. At 1:30, a car pulled into the driveway. I looked up and saw it through the lace-curtained black sedan, polished, new. A man stepped out, and when he turned toward the house, my heart gave a startled twist. I knew that face. Mr. Dalton. He was an old friend of my husband's, a man who'd come to dinner here more times than I could count. When my husband died, he'd come to the funeral, offered his condolences, even brought a casserole. We hadn't spoken in years, but I remembered him well, the kind of man who always smiled like he knew something you didn't. I watched him straighten his tie before knocking on the door. Melissa hurried to greet him. Mr. Dalton, so good to see you again, she said brightly. Her voice floated down the hallway, cheerful, rehearsed. I stayed in my chair, still and silent. They moved into the living room, footsteps light against the hardwood floor. From where I sat, I could hear every word the way voices travel when doors are open and hearts are not. So, this is the place, Mr. Dalton said. Beautiful bones, you weren't exaggerating. Melissa laughed softly. Yes, it has potential. Just needs a little modernization. Potential, modernization. I could feel the words pressing against my chest, each one a little shove. And the owner, he asked. She's moving soon, you said. Yes, Melissa replied, her tone smooth, casual. She's my mother. We're helping her transition to a quieter place. It's time, really. She's had this house for decades. It's too much for her now. Her voice carried no malice, only the cruel gentleness of practicality. It was the same tone people use when rehoming an old pet. I gripped the armrest tightly, willing my breath to stay even. She must have a lot of memories here, Dalton said. Oh, of course, Melissa replied, but she understands. We'll make it easy for her. Easy for her. I wanted to laugh, or cry, or both, but I sat there, motionless, staring at the same line in my book, eyes unmoving, while the room behind me became a marketplace for my life. They walked through the house, and I followed their voices as they moved from room to room, the kitchen, the hallway, my husband's study. Each time, Melissa's tone grew brighter, more confident. We'd take down this wall, she said once. Open up the space. That's a load-bearing wall, I whispered under my breath. In the dining room, she said, we'd probably remove this old cabinet. It's outdated. That cabinet had belonged to my grandmother. My mother used to run her hand along its carved edges whenever she visited. Sturdy, she'd say, built to last. And now, a stranger nodded thoughtfully, imagining how easily it could be discarded. As they climbed the stairs, I slipped quietly out of my chair and moved toward the bottom step. I could hear them moving through the hallway above, the faint echo of their footsteps passing my bedroom door. Melissa was talking about renovation costs, and Dalton's low hum of agreement followed her like a shadow. Then, suddenly, I heard my name. She doesn't know yet, Dalton asked. Melissa laughed lightly. Oh, she thinks we're just helping with the bills. You know how the elderly are set in their ways. Once everything's signed, we'll tell her gently. My husband will handle it. My husband. The words stung up because they were untrue, but because of the way she said them, as if I were some fragile burden her marriage had inherited. She's lucky to have you managing things, Dalton said. Yes, Melissa replied. David and I are just trying to do what's best for everyone. Best for everyone. The quiet hypocrisy of it almost made me laugh. They moved into my bedroom then. I heard the creak of the floorboards, the rustle of curtains being drawn. My chest tightened. That room was sacred, still holding traces of my husband's cologne. The photo of him on the dresser. The small trinkets of a shared life. This could make a great office, Melissa said cheerfully. Tons of natural light. My husband's room, my sanctuary. For a moment, my knees went weak, and I had to lean against the wall. Then Dalton spoke, his voice low. You're sure she's of sound mind to agree to the sale? Melissa hesitated. Well, she's fine now, but you never know with age. We just thought it would be easier to handle things while we still can. The casual cruelty of that sentence was too much. I turned and walked slowly back to the living room before the trembling in my hands could give me away. I sat in my chair again, staring out the window as if the garden might offer comfort. But even the roses looked tired, their petals bowing under the weight of a breeze too heavy to carry. Minutes later, the group came back downstairs, still chatting, still smiling. Dalton's laughter rolled through the air like the sound of coins clinking together. It's a fine property, he said. Send me the papers once she signs. I'll make sure of it, Melissa replied. I heard the door close, the car engine start, and the hum of their conversation fading down the street. Silence filled the house like water filling a sinking ship. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The walls seemed to close in, the air pressing down. Everything I'd built, every meal cooked, every lullaby sung, every memory painted into these walls had been reduced to figures and floor plans. Then came the sound of footsteps, again David's. He'd been outside, finishing the lawn. He came in, wiping sweat from his brow, and asked, "Who was that?" Melissa's voice floated from the kitchen, to calm, to smooth. "Just Mr. Dalton. He came to see the house." "The house?" David repeated slowly. "Relax," she said. "It's just business." He didn't answer, and I could tell, from the silence that followed, that he hadn't known. Or maybe he had, but not like this. I turned my gaze toward the window again, pretending to watch the clouds, but inside my thoughts burned clear as fire. They had shown my home, my life, to a man who once dined at this very table, toasted birthdays with my husband, and held my son as a baby. That was betrayal in its purest form, the kind that wears a familiar face. And though my heart cracked in a way words could never mend, a strange calm settled in, because now I had seen enough, enough to know, enough to act. But just as I was about to stand, a faint sound drifted from the hallway. Melissa's voice, hushed, urgent. "We'll need her signature soon. If she refuses, we can." Then she stopped, because she'd seen me standing there. The world seemed to still when our eyes met. Melissa stood at the far front end of the hallway, her hand frozen mid-gesture, her lips parted around the words she hadn't finished. Between us, the afternoon light slanted through the window, falling in long stripes across the floor, bright enough to make the dust shimmer like tiny truths caught in the air. For one breath, neither of us moved. The silence between us was louder than any sound that could have filled it. I could feel the pulse in my neck, slow but strong, all the quiet watching, the patient note-taking, the pretending I had prepared myself for this exact second without knowing it. Her eyes flickered, searching my face for a clue. Had I heard everything? Had I understood? I didn't blink. Her fingers tightened around the folder she was holding. "Ellie," she began, the tone a little too light, a little too quick. "I didn't realize you were up." I didn't answer. I simply looked at her, the daughter-in-law I'd welcomed into this house, the woman I'd cooked for, confided in, trusted. In the narrow strip of sunlight, I saw the faint tremor in her hand, the way her throat moved as she swallowed. Behind her, on the side table, the folder she'd set down was half open, a corner of paper jutting out, my name printed neatly across the top. From where I stood, I could just make out the words, "Transfer of ownership." The sight struck like a physical blow. I didn't gasp, didn't cry out. I only felt a deep, steady ache settle into my bones, the kind that comes when truth stops being a question and becomes a fact. Melissa seemed to realize what I was looking at. Her body shifted, subtly, to block my view. "It's nothing important," she said too quickly, voice trembling at the edges. "Just some paperwork David asked me to." I took a single step forward. Her words faltered. The distance between us felt electric, charged with everything unspoken. The ticking of the hallway clock sounded impossibly loud, each second stretching thin, ready to break. "You shouldn't be standing," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Let me get you a cup of tea." Still, I said nothing. The air thickened. I could see the pulse fluttering in her neck, the careful way she lifted her chin, as if to reclaim control. Somewhere deeper in the house, a floorboard creaked. David moving in another room, unaware that the world inside this hallway had changed forever. Melissa took a breath. I meant to sound calm, and began again. I was only Her sentence died the moment the paper slipped from the folder and landed at her feet. The soft flutter of it hitting the floor was the only sound in the house. I looked down at it, then back up at her, and in that instant between her quick inhale and my slow exhale, something shifted permanently between us. She knew I'd seen. I knew she knew. Neither of us looked away. The sunlight, the silence, the stillness, they all seemed to hold their breath with us. Then, from somewhere behind her, David's voice called lightly, "Melissa, who are you talking to?" She didn't answer, because she couldn't, and I still standing there, my hand resting on the doorframe, my heart steady as a clock that refuses to stop. Let the silence speak for me. For one suspended heartbeat, everything in the house stood still. The clock, the light, even the dust drifting in the sunbeam between us. Melissa didn't move. Neither did I. Then David's footsteps broke the spell. Slow at first, then quicker, his shadow stretching down the hallway before he appeared at the corner. He stopped when he saw us. "What's going on?" Melissa spoke too fast. "Nothing, just talking to your mother." Her voice sounded wrong, too high, too brittle. David's gaze shifted to me, then down to the paper on the floor. His name stared back at him from the heading, the bold type of legal print he couldn't pretend not to recognize. The blood drained from his face. I bent slowly, picked up the page, and held it out to him. I believe this is yours. He took it but didn't read. His fingers trembled. Mum, listen, no, I said quietly, and the word came out steadier than I felt. You listen. Melissa stepped forward, panic flickering in her eyes. Ellie, it's a misunderstanding. These are just preliminary documents. Nothing's been done. Preliminary, I repeated, tasting the word. So you've only planned to sell my home, not actually done it yet. How thoughtful. David ran a hand through his hair. We were going to tell you when, I asked. After the signatures, after the movers came, after I woke up one morning to find strangers in my kitchen. He flinched. The paper shook in his hand. Melissa's mouth tightened. We were trying to help you, she said, the false sympathy of practiced justification coating every syllable. You can't manage this house forever. It's too big, too much work. You deserve a simpler life. I looked at her evenly. A simpler life. And where exactly was this new life supposed to be? She hesitated. A retirement community, near the coast. Lovely place. You'd have your own room. People your age, people my age, I said softly. You make it sound like a disease to be contained. David's voice cracked the air between us. Mum, stop, please. We didn't mean you meant every word, I interrupted. I heard you. I heard everything. The calls, the meetings, the price you put on these walls. He went pale. You were listening. I was living, I said, in my own home. It's remarkable what one hears when people forget you still exist. Melissa's composure wavered, her smile collapsing into something sharper. You don't understand, Ellie. We're drowning in bills. This place costs more than it's worth. You thought convenience was kinder than honesty, I said. You thought I'd quietly disappear if you wrapped betrayal in good intentions. David took a step closer. We weren't trying to hurt you. I looked at my son, the same eyes that once looked up at me with trust when he was small. Now full of guilt, he didn't know how to carry. Then what were you trying to do? He couldn't answer. The silence pressed on us. The clock in the hall struck 3, each chime deep and deliberate. I could almost hear my husband's voice beneath it. Don't raise your voice, Ellie. Let the truth do the shouting. I turned toward the living room, motioning for them to follow. They did, reluctantly, Melissa clutching her folder like a shield. We sat, the three of us, in a triangle of unease. The air smelled of lemon polish and deceit. I folded my hands. You've both been busy, I said. Agents, appraisals, even Mr. Dalton. He must have been delighted to see the inside of this house again. David's head jerked up. Dalton, he came here? Yes, I said. Your wife showed him around while you cut the lawn. Melissa shot him a quick, defensive look. It was just an inquiry. He's a potential investor. In our home, I said. David sank into the sofa, his shoulders sagging. For a long while he said nothing. Then, very quietly, he asked, Why didn't you say something sooner? I smiled sadly. Because I wanted to see how far you'd go. Melissa bristled. You're twisting this. We only wanted security. You wouldn't understand. You've never had to start over like we have. The calm I'd held for weeks hardened into something unbreakable. My dear, I've started over more times than you've finished what you began. I buried a husband, raised a child alone, kept this roof above our heads with hands that never stopped working. Don't tell me what starting over means. She looked away, her cheeks flushing with a mix of anger and shame. David tried again. Mum, please, Melissa's right about one thing. This house is too much. The stairs, the upkeep. You could fall. You could stop, I said softly. Don't use my safety as an excuse for your greed. He opened his mouth, but the words died before they formed. Something inside me shifted, then a calm, almost tender certainty. I realized I wasn't speaking from pain anymore. I was speaking from power. I stood. You've made plans for my future, I said. Now you'll hear mine. They watched in silence as I crossed the room to the writing desk, opened the drawer, and took out a folded envelope. Mr. Whitman's neat handwriting looked stark against the cream paper. I set it on the table between us. What's that? David asked. Reality, I said. This house cannot be sold without my consent. The title's protected. I took care of it weeks ago. Melissa's eyes widened. You changed the papers. I corrected them, I said. I also made new arrangements for where my home will go when I no longer need it. David swallowed hard. To who? You'll know soon enough, I said. For now, just understand this. You've already lost the right to decide for me. Melissa shot to her feet. You can't do that. Already did. The words landed like stones dropped in still water. David looked from her to me, torn between loyalty and shame. Mum, what do you want from us? I want honesty, I said. Not apologies rehearsed in panic. Just truth. He hesitated, and then quietly, as if confessing to himself, he said, she was right. We thought it would be easier this way. Easier. The smallest word, and yet it carried all the weight of what we'd become. Melissa turned on him. Don't, but he didn't stop. We didn't think you'd fight back, he said to me. You've been so quiet since Dad died. I thought you'd let go. I felt tears prick my eyes, not from pain but from a grief deeper than anger, the grief of realizing your child measured your silence and mistook it for surrender. I will let go one day, I said softly, but not like this. For a long time none of us spoke. The house itself seemed to listen. I could almost feel its old bones humming with memory, reminding me whose hands had built it, whose love had filled it. Finally, Melissa broke the silence. So what now? She asked, defiance creeping back into her tone. Now, I said, you decide what kind of people you want to be when the truth starts following you around this house. Her mouth opened, ready with another protest. But before she could speak, the envelope on the table slipped, slightly dislodged by the faint vibration of a phone buzzing underneath. The sound was David's. He pulled the phone out, looked at the screen, and froze, his face drained of color. What is it? Melissa asked. He didn't answer. He turned the phone toward her. I couldn't see the screen, only the way her expression changed from confusion to horror. Then her gaze shot to me, and I knew whatever message they'd just received, whatever new truth it carried, was something neither of them had expected. The air grew still again, heavy with the promise of another secret waiting to break. The hum of the phone was the only sound in the room, a small, insistent vibration that seemed to shake everything fragile inside it. David stared at the screen, his fingers motionless, his throat working as if the words he wanted were too heavy to climb out. Melissa leaned closer, the folder still clutched in one hand, her breath quick and shallow. What is it? She whispered again. He hesitated, then turned the screen toward her. I caught a glimpse before he could shield it, a message preview, bright against the dim light of the living room. Offer received, buyer, ready to proceed. Need signed consent today. The message was from the agent, the same one who had walked my hallways in my absence, who had looked at my memories and seen only square footage. Melissa's face drained of color. Why is he texting you now? She hissed. Because he thinks we still have her signature, David said quietly, the shame in his voice trembling. He doesn't know we don't. The weight of his confession pressed through the room. He set the phone down on the table as if it were something poisonous. For a long time, none of us spoke. The air itself seemed to wait. Then Melissa broke first. You were supposed to handle it, she said to him, voice sharp, brittle. You said she'd never find out. David's answer came out as a whisper. And you said it was the right thing. They were unraveling in front of me, their unity dissolving like sugar in hot water. I should have felt satisfaction, but all I felt was an ache too deep for victory. I sat back in my chair, letting the sound of their voices fade into the background of my thoughts. Every lie, every excuse, every half-truth they'd told me played through my mind in order. It was strange how betrayal didn't explode like thunder, but instead settled quietly, like dust after a collapse. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm. Turn that phone off. They froze. Now, I repeated. David obeyed. The room went still again, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the mantel. I want you both to listen carefully, I said, because after today, there will be no more pretending we live under the same roof as family. Melissa's lips parted, but no sound came. I have seen the papers, the emails, the signatures you forged. I know about the meetings and the buyer. And I know this. I nodded toward the envelope still on the table. Has already made your plans impossible. David closed his eyes. Mom, please, do you have any idea, I said quietly, what it feels like to raise a child, to protect him from every storm, and then find out he built one for you himself? His eyes opened, wet and small. I thought I was helping. We were drowning. You were greedy, I said, and afraid to work harder, afraid to live smaller, afraid to face disappointment. You decided I was the easiest corner to cut. He said nothing. Melissa's jaw tightened. Her eyes flicked toward the doorway as if she might leave, but she didn't. I stood slowly. My knees ached, but I stood tall. You've both told yourselves a beautiful story, that betrayal dressed as practicality isn't betrayal at all. But here's the truth. Intent doesn't wash away action. You planned to take from me the one thing that still connected me to your father. You were ready to trade my life's work for a deposit. Melissa finally found her voice. It's just a house, Ellie. The words rang through the air like glass shattering. Just a house, I repeated softly. Then why did you want it so badly? She looked away. David covered his face with his hands. I made a mistake. No, I said. You made a choice. A mistake is spilling milk. You built a lie, brick by brick. He didn't argue. The truth sat between us, heavy and undeniable. Something inside me broke, then not the kind of break that destroys, but the kind that releases. All the anger, all the pain, all the questions I'd carried began to slide away, leaving behind only clarity. I looked around the room, the photographs, the worn furniture, the faint scent of apple pie that still lingered from yesterday, and I realized I wasn't mourning anymore. I was deciding. Tomorrow, I said quietly, you'll both pack your things. Melissa's head snapped up. What? You heard me. I'm giving you until tomorrow evening. After that, you'll find somewhere else to live. You can't just I can, I said. And I will. This house is mine, and the peace inside it will be mine again. David lowered his hands, eyes red. Mum, where will we go? You're adults, I said gently. You'll figure it out. Melissa took a step forward. We can fix this. No, I said. You can't. You can only learn from it. She stood there, trembling with fury. She didn't know how to aim. You're overreacting. People make mistakes. Families forgive. Forgiveness isn't the absence of consequence, I said. It's the space you stand in after you've accepted it. For a long moment, she stared at me, her mouth half open, then turned away, muttering something under her breath. David rose slowly, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. I'm sorry, Mum. I looked at him, the boy who used to run to me with scraped knees, who'd once believed I could fix anything. I know you are, I said, but some lessons have to ache before they stick. He nodded, his shoulders shaking once before he steadied himself. I walked to the window, looking out at the garden. The late afternoon light made the roses glow faintly, the same roses his father had planted decades ago. They had survived every season, the droughts, the frost, the careless pruning. They always grew back stronger. Behind me, the silence settled again. I could sense them both standing there, unsure, afraid to speak. Finally, I turned. There's tea in the pot, I said. If you're staying another night under my roof, you'll drink it quietly. And then I left them there, in that room that had once held laughter, now echoing only with the hollow sound of realization. Upstairs, in my bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the exhaustion wash over me. The house was silent again, the kind of silence that follows after a storm, when you know the air is clean but the world still feels raw. I looked at the framed photograph of my husband on the dresser. It's done, I whispered. They know. Somewhere downstairs, a door closed softly. I didn't know if they were leaving or simply hiding. But either way, the decision had been made. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring. I took my notebook from the drawer and wrote the last line of the day. Sometimes breaking is the only way to see what was holding you together. Then, I closed it, set it beside the lamp, and lay back against the pillow. For the first time in months, I slept without listening for whispers. The next morning the house was so quiet, it felt almost new. Sunlight slid across the floorboards in thin, forgiving lines, and the air smelled faintly of rain and lemon polish. For the first time in months, I didn't wake to the sound of whispered voices, or the weight of suspicion pressing against the walls. Only the gentle murmur of the kettle reminded me the world still moved forward. I went about my morning as I always had: boiled water, sliced an apple, fed the sparrows outside the kitchen window, but everything felt lighter, as if the house itself had exhaled. Somewhere upstairs, drawers opened and closed, muted thuds marking the sound of two people packing quietly. I didn't go up. Some goodbyes don't need witnesses. When David came down, his eyes were tired but softer than I'd seen in years. He stopped near the doorway, hands buried in his jacket pockets, like a boy caught halfway between apology and farewell. We'll go today, he said. I nodded. Melissa appeared behind him, her face pale, her usual poise gone. She didn't meet my eyes. She simply said, "Thank you for letting us stay last night." I almost smiled at the formality of it, but my voice stayed even. Drive carefully. They left not long after. The car engine started, gravel crunched, and then the sound faded into distance. I watched from the window, not to ensure they'd gone, But to mark the moment I got my life back, the garden looked brighter. The roses bent gently in the breeze as if bowing toward freedom. When the last trace of the car disappeared, I closed the door and leaned against it, breathing in the quiet. The stillness wasn't heavy anymore. It was mine. That afternoon, I walked through each room slowly, touching the edges of furniture, straightening a picture frame, smoothing a curtain. Every space felt like a page I was rereading after someone had written in the margins. I opened the windows and let the air change. Fresh wind carried out the old tension, the stale perfume of secrecy. In the study, I paused by my husband's chair. His photograph sat where it always had, the smile that time never managed to fade, looking up at me. "You were right," I said softly. "Love survives, but sometimes you have to choose what form it takes." Later, I sat at my writing desk and called Mr. Whitman. "It's done," I told him. He understood without needing detail. "Do you still want to proceed with the final transfer?" "Yes," I said, "exactly as we discussed." He promised to handle everything and ended the call with a kindness that felt like closure. Over the next weeks, I filled my days with small, deliberate acts of living, baking for the neighbors, tending the garden, walking to the market. People who had barely nodded before began to linger and talk. I realized how much I'd hidden inside my own walls while pretending to keep busy. The loneliness that used to feel like an empty room now felt like space to breathe. One evening, I found myself sorting through old boxes in the attic. Among them was a faded folder of travel brochures my husband and I had collected years ago. One showed a picture of a seaside cottage, white shutters facing an endless stretch of blue. On its cover, written in his handwriting, were the words, "One day." The next morning, I called the number printed on the back, not expecting it still to exist. To my surprise, it did. The woman on the phone said the cottage was still there, now available for rent. I didn't hesitate. "I'll take it," I said. By the end of the month, I packed what mattered: photographs, my husband's watch, a few favorite books, and the small notebook that had become the record of everything unsaid. The rest could stay. The house would soon belong to the charity whose volunteers had once cared for him in his final weeks. That felt right, his kindness, finding a way to live on. When the movers came, I stood in the doorway one last time. The rooms echoed softly, stripped of their layers of deceit, holding only memory and forgiveness. I whispered goodbye, not to the walls, but to the version of myself that had needed them. The drive to the coast was long and quiet. Fields rolled by, gold under a patient sky. Somewhere between towns, the heaviness that had clung to me since that first overheard conversation finally lifted. Grief didn't vanish, simply loosened its grip, making room for peace. The cottage was smaller than the house, but perfect. White curtains fluttered in the sea breeze, and the air smelled of salt and wild thyme. The first night, I fell asleep to the sound of waves instead of whispers. In the days that followed, I made a new rhythm. Mornings were for walking along the shore, afternoons for writing letters, evenings for sitting by the window with a cup of tea. As the horizon turned from gold to violet, I found companionship in simple hello shopkeepers, a retired teacher next door, a fisherman who brought me fresh catch every Friday. None of them knew my story, and that anonymity felt like grace. One morning, a letter arrived, the handwriting unmistakably David's. The envelope trembled in my hands before I opened it. The words inside were uneven, raw. "Mum, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know we understand now what we did, and why it hurt. We're starting over, properly this time. I'll never stop being sorry." I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it inside my notebook, not as evidence, but as closure. Forgiveness, I'd learned, isn't a gift you give once. It's a door you leave unlocked, even if no one walks through. That evening, standing on the porch, I watched the tide slide in, erasing footprints left by strangers. The wind carried the faint smell of roses from somewhere inland, and for a moment, it felt as though the house I'd left behind was breathing with me. Relieved to be free of its own ghosts, I thought of everything that had happened: the lies, the heartbreak, the silence that had taught me more than any words could end. I smiled. Age hadn't made me invisible. It had made me enduring. As the last light melted into the sea, I whispered to the wind. They thought I couldn't hear, but I did. And now I hear everything else: the sea, the peace, the sound of starting again. The horizon shimmered, and I closed my eyes, letting the rhythm of the waves match the rhythm of my heart, calm, unbroken. I wasn't the woman who'd been betrayed anymore. I was the woman who refused to break. Time, I've learned, doesn't heal everything, it simply changes the shape of the pain until you can hold it without cutting yourself. Months have passed since I left the house on Maple Street, and the sea has become my metronome. Every morning it pulls the world apart and stitches it back together again. Somewhere in that endless rhythm, I found my own. I still wake early, just before dawn. When the horizon is a faint promise of light, the kettle hums, the cup warms my hands, and the waves begin their quiet conversation with the shore. Some mornings I write in my notebook, not about what happened, but about what remains. The smell of salt, the laughter of gulls, the courage it takes to start over when no one's watching. I used to think the opposite of betrayal was loyalty. Now I know it's understanding. Betrayal ends when you stop needing the people who broke you to explain why they did it. That's the gift of age, seeing motives without absorbing them. I no longer ask why they did it. I ask what it taught me. It taught me that silence can be strength, but it can also be mistaken for surrender. That love without boundaries turns into permission. That forgiveness is not a door you throw open. It's a window you crack to let in light once the storm has passed. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I think about David. I picture him somewhere inland, working again, learning how to be the man he once wanted to be. In my imagination, Melissa is softer now, the sharpness of ambition sanded down by humility. Maybe they talk about me. Maybe they don't. Either way, I wish them peace. Their letter still lies inside my notebook. I've read it only once since it arrived, and that was enough. It reminded me that remorse doesn't erase wrongdoing, but it does mark the start of a new story, theirs, not mine. My chapter with them ended the day they drove away. But the book of motherhood never closes completely. People in town often ask if I miss the old house. I tell them no, but that's not entirely true. Sometimes I miss the creak of the stairs, the smell of roses through the open window, the echo of my husband's laugh in the hallway. What I don't miss is the heaviness that lived inside those walls near the end, the secrets. The fear of hearing my own name spoken in hushed tones. This cottage, with its uneven floors and sea-worn shutters, holds only truth, and that is enough. Last week, a small parcel arrived from the charity I left the house to. Inside was a photograph. Volunteers in the garden, repainting the porch, planting new flowers. They'd found a note my husband had tucked behind a beam years ago, one I never knew existed. It was written on a scrap of paper in his neat, deliberate hand. For Ellie Mae, this home always belonged to kindness. I sat with that note for a long while, tears sliding down without sadness. In the end, that's what I'd managed to do, return the house to kindness. Maybe that was his way of telling me I'd finished what we started together. Evenings are my favorite now. I sit by the window with the lamp low and let the memories come in fragments, good ones, mostly. The first time David rode his bicycle without help. The nights my husband and I stayed up talking until the clock forgot to move. Even the hurtful moments have softened, like stones polished by the tide. They no longer weigh me down. They simply remind me I lived fully, fiercely, honestly. Sometimes neighbors visit, we drink tea and trade stories, and I see that everyone carries a version of lost, different names, same ache. We laugh about how aging is a thief and a teacher all at once. One of them, a widower named Peter, said the other night, "You don't look broken, Eleanor." I smiled and told him, "That's because I decided not to be." There's a quiet power in deciding who you'll be after the world disappoints you. I didn't rebuild my life to prove anything. I rebuilt it because standing still in sorrow felt smaller than I was meant to be. And that's the message I want to leave behind, not about houses or wills or the cruelty of family mistakes, but about endurance, the kind that sits quietly, sips its tea, and says, "I'm still here." When the wind turns strong and rattles the windows, I sometimes hear echoes of that long ago afternoon, the voices that once plotted around me, the words that changed everything. But now they sound distant, like a story told to someone else. I can listen without flinching, because in truth, that day didn't end me. It began the version of me who finally remembered her own strength. I walk the beach most evenings before the light fades. The sand shifts underfoot, the tide erases my path, and I think, that's how healing works. It doesn't rewrite the past. It makes it easier to walk across thoughts. So here I am, an old woman by the sea, with silver hair that catches the last light, and a heart that still believes in new beginnings. The house on Maple Street is gone. The pain is a quiet echo, and life, somehow, is beautiful again. If you're listening to this and you've ever been hurt by the ones you've trusted most, remember this. You are not the story they wrote about you. You are the story you choose to tell next. I used to believe silence was the language of love. Now I know it's the language of strength. Because silence doesn't mean you've given up, it means you've learned what deserves your voice and what only needs your peace. And when I look out at the endless horizon each evening, I think of every woman who's ever been dismissed, doubted, or betrayed and whisper, "Hold on, you are stronger than the storm." The sea answers with its steady roar, timeless and certain. I smile, sip my tea, and close my notebook for the last time. "She thought I couldn't hear," I murmur, letting the words drift into the wind. But I heard every word, and I learned that even in the quietest heartbreak, a woman's heart can still choose grace. And somewhere beyond the tide, I swear I can hear my husband's voice in the surf, soft and proud. "You did well, Ellie. You didn't break, you bloomed." If this story touched your heart, take a quiet moment before you go. Maybe you've lived a version of it yourself, the kind of pain that makes you wiser instead of bitter. Remember, my dear, life has a way of giving back what we thought we'd lost, just in gentler forms. So hold on to grace, not grudges. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stay a while, because I've got plenty more cups of tea to share with you.